Do you ever have days where you just feel like everything goes wrong? Like nothing goes right? My outfit isn't right. This is the third time I've recorded this video. Shayna, get your anger together. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're back, if you are new, welcome to my channel. I'm Shayna and I have another true crime case for you today. Just my usual disclaimer, this is all information that I have found online that I've compiled into a video for educational and entertainment purposes. Now, the story that I'm sharing with you today, I know I say this about every single case that I talk about, but it's very bizarre and it's one of those stories that nobody really knows about. I haven't heard any videos or seen any videos on YouTube about it or any podcasts about it. If you do know of any podcasts or any, I guess TV shows or movies about this, please let me know down below because it really is an interesting story. And in order for me to find it, I was just scouring through the internet, looking on Google. It wasn't one that was kind of like a hand-me-down. Like I didn't find another YouTuber that did this case. So hopefully I am one of the first people to tell you about it, and hopefully you enjoy. So thanks so much for joining me today, and let's get started. Anthony and Ann Anastasi are a married couple that were living in Lothian, Maryland at the time of this case. And Lothian was described to be a very sleepy, quiet, peaceful, slow-moving town. It had rolling hills and open land, and it was a very calm place where nothing bad really ever happened. So the two of them lived there with their 5 children, and to the outside world, they had a relatively happy marriage. Their life seemed to look really good from the outside looking in. And so the 7 of them lived in the house with their children, as well as a family friend who lived in the basement. Her name was Jacqueline Riggs. She was kind of down on her luck, so she was staying with the family and lived in the basement at the time. So the 8 of them all lived in the family home. It was a decent sized single family home, but it was a little tight for 8 people. Nevertheless, they all made the best of the situation and they seemed to be really happy. On October 5th of 2015, Ann wakes up and she's planning to take the children out. They have a couple dentist appointments they need to go to. She needs to drop them off at school. And then after she's done with this, she's planning to go to the grocery store and go pick up some groceries for the family. So 4 of the children were left at school, and one of the children, the 13-year-old, actually came back to the home after going grocery shopping with Ann. She didn't go to school that day for whatever reason. And when Ann got back to the house, she was expecting Anthony to be up and moving around because she had to take him to a doctor's appointment that day after she got back from the market. So when she got home, she was looking around for him. He wasn't in the common area of the home, so she did go upstairs to find him. And when she went upstairs, she saw a scene that she was not expecting. When she gets to her bedroom, she sees that Anthony is laying on the bed. At first glance, it looks as though he's still asleep, but she notices that a gun is laying next to him, and when she gets closer, she sees that he is not responsive. So she doesn't know exactly what happened, but she's presuming that he is dead, and she calls 911, asks for someone to come out immediately. But something that's interesting is that the 911 operator noted that she was very matter-of-fact. The way she explained what happened almost was as though it was a planned script, like she had pre-planned what she was going to say.
I just spent the day taking kids to the dentist and then going grocery shopping. I'm supposed to be leaving to take my husband to a doctor's appointment right now, but he's not responding at all, and he's got his gun laying next to him in the bed.
Do you think he shot himself?
I don't know. I didn't turn the lights on in the room.
Officers did report to the scene to find Anthony Anastasi dead in his bed with a bullet wound to the head and the gun laying next to him on the bed. And something that officers did note, similar to the 911 operator, was that Ann was very calm. She was kind of shy. She didn't talk a lot. She was reserved. But in addition to this, she was very calm. She was not crying. She was not hysterical, how most women would be after finding their husband dead in their bed or finding really anyone dead. She just didn't react how most people would react in a situation like this. And the people who do true crime stories often say that how is one to know what a person a person's normal reaction would be under such a high stress kind of situation, which is fair, but a little something something is expected, right? A little, like, I don't know, pacing back and forth, maybe tears, maybe just something. But she didn't do any of that. She was very calm, like she was prepared for for the police to come and to tell them her story, and to tell the story of how she just found her husband dead in the bed. So almost immediately, the police begin investigating Anthony's death and are at the point of very quickly deeming it a suicide. So a couple reasons why they were presuming this. He had a very close range gun wound. So we know this because he had burn marks around the bullet hole on his skin, on his head, which indicates that it was a, close range bullet wound, I guess you can say. So usually when someone commits suicide, the firearm is very close and it leaves that kind of burn residue on their skin. But in addition to this, Ann did tell police that Anthony was experiencing some depression. So he was going through a phase in his life where he wasn't very happy. He had been injured and had multiple back surgeries in recent years, so he couldn't work at all. And because of this, Ann told investigators that, he was depressed, he was down on his luck, he just wasn't in the right frame of mind. And pretty quickly, she was able to convince police that he had committed suicide, most likely. So they're like, okay, that's all well and good. Thank you for the information. But they want to know a little bit more. They're not just going to leave and say, oh, it was a suicide. That's it. Like, no, that wasn't the approach that they were taking, even though that was their first inclination. So they do begin to ask Ann, who else lives in the home with you? Is it just you and your husband? Who else lives here? And Ann tells the police that her husband, and their 5 children, in addition to their house guest that I told you about named Jacqueline, also lives there. And they said, okay, where's Jacqueline? Have you heard from her? A gun went off in the house. Wouldn't she be around? Have you seen her? And Ann says, no, I actually haven't seen her today. The last time I even heard anything of her was last night, when Anthony and Jacqueline were in the basement. I heard them arguing, and Anthony came upstairs and he was visibly angry. But since then, I haven't seen or heard from Jacqueline. That is what Ann said. So police are like, okay, that's interesting. And when Ann tells police that Jacqueline lives in the basement, of course, they go down to the basement so that they can see if Jacqueline heard anything, or if she saw anyone enter the home, or if, Anthony had mentioned that he was going to hurt himself. So of course, police begin making their way down into the basement, and they're thinking that Jacqueline's probably just down there listening to music, because the first thing that they hear is heavy metal rock music. The room in the basement is kind of dimly lit. There's a couple lights on, but for the most part, it's not the brightest room. And when they get down there, they see a woman laying on the floor. And as they get closer, they realize that this woman is covered in her own blood, laying in a pool of blood. And it's quickly identified as Jacqueline Riggs. So they have Jacqueline, who's dead in the basement. They have Anthony, who's dead upstairs. Jacqueline was stabbed to death. So she had over 40 stab wounds on her body. Over 40. And she had cuts and scratches all over her hands and arms, which indicates that she fought for her life. So she had a lot of defensive wounds. So at this point, the police are like, okay, we have a suicide upstairs and we have a death downstairs. The doors are all locked from, the inside. The windows are all bolted shut. There's no broken glass anywhere, no signs of forced entry. So now they go from the suicide theory to a murder-suicide theory. And this, in combination with the fact, all of the other things in combination with the fact that Ann told them that she overheard Jacqueline and Anthony arguing the night before, police are really thinking, okay, Anthony probably got angry, got in a rage, killed Jacqueline, and then shot himself to death. So, Ann is continuing with her story. She is seeming innocent, even though she kind of acted strange in the initial phases of the investigation. The police don't really have any reason to think that she should be considered a suspect. Obviously, she's a person of interest because she's so close to the case. But they have no reason to believe that she has done anything. So they're going, through the motions, just waiting for some forensics to come back from the medical examiner's office. And they do get some forensics back that indicate that Anthony still had the projectile in his head. And of course, they remove it, they analyze it, and what they find is that the projectile, the bullet that was still in his skull, is from a .380 handgun. Now, the handgun that was laying next to Anthony on the bed was a .45 caliber gun. The bullet inside of his head is from a .380. Now, I had to do some research on this because I don't know a lot about firearms, but what I found is that a .380 bullet is much smaller than a .45. So investigators, when they were doing the investigation, they attempted to shoot a .380 bullet from a .45 caliber gun. And what they found was the bullet literally just falls out of the gun. Like it cannot fire. It's impossible to fire. So this literally flips the investigation upside down because they realized in that moment that this wasn't a suicide at all. It would have been impossible for Anthony to kill himself with the .45 caliber gun and have a .380 bullet in his head. Absolutely impossible. So now they know that they're not investigating a murder-suicide. They're investigating 2 cold-blooded murders. So with this new information, of course, police want to talk to Ann again, right? So they bring her down to the station. They're questioning her. And sis begins spilling tea. She starts flapping her lips and saying everything. So they believe. And she's like, you know what? I'm going to just keep it a bean with y'all. He abused me for a really long time. And he even threatened to kill me. She's talking about Anthony. He even threatened to kill me. And guess what else? Jacqueline, the little girl living in the basement, the 25-year-old girl living in the basement, she wasn't just a family friend. That was my husband's mistress. Oh, yes. So investigators are like, oh, okay. Really? Like, they're like, okay, keep spilling. And Ann tells them that basically how Jacqueline even came to live in the home is that Ann and Anthony had for a brief time lived in Michigan where they met Jacqueline. And they were trying to spice up their marriage or something to that effect. And they got into a 3-way romance with Jacqueline, essentially. So not only was Anthony intimately involved with Jacqueline, so was Ann. And apparently, allegedly, according to Ann, they did have one occasion where they had a sexual encounter, all 3 of them together, and Ann did not like it, and it was not something that she wanted to continue to pursue. It was one occasion. She said after that, you know what, I'm not comfortable with this. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like something that should be a part of my marriage. I don't want any more parts of this. But Anthony, on the other hand, Anthony said, are you sure? He basically was trying to convince Ann that, you know, this was something that was good for them. It's something that he wanted. But Ann absolutely, allegedly, based on what she told investigators, did not want any parts of it. So the 2 of them moved back to Maryland, and they, you know, I'm assuming from Ann's perspective, continued their marriage and attempted to remain together happily, just the 2 of them. Now, Anthony was not ready to let this 3-way situation go as easily as Ann thought he was. So after Ann and Anthony moved back to Maryland, Jacqueline is still in communication with Anthony. And at some point, Anthony is like, you know what? I would rather be with you than be with Ann. So come on out here to Maryland. I'm going to set you up in my basement and we're going to be together. And obviously Ann was not okay with this. She wasn't happy with this idea. You know, this wasn't the ideal for her, of course, to say the least. But she didn't feel like she should be the one to have to leave the home. So she felt like because Anthony wanted to explore this new connection, wanted to really dive into this romance with Jacqueline, fine. They can call their marriage off. She wasn't jealous. The 2 of them can be together. And what she told Anthony was, look, take your stuff and take your mistress and go and get out. But Anthony said, I'm not going anywhere. This is just my home as much as it is yours. And Jacqueline is my lady. So she's coming and she's staying. So obviously over time, Ann began to kind of feel this rage and anger, most likely jealousy. But she didn't say that she did. When police asked her, like, hey, were you jealous? You know, they're trying to get to the bottom of what really happened to Anthony and Jacqueline and who killed them and why. They're asking her, they said, were you jealous of what happened? And Ann said, I was not jealous at all. I was just ready for him to go. So even still at this point, Ann doesn't look guilty. And she even agrees, you know, to do she does the polygraph test, which a guilty person usually is not going to just jump at the idea of doing a polygraph test. But she says, look, strap me in. I'm completely fine with it. She hands over her cell phone. She tells investigators, there's nothing in my phone that will incriminate me. Take it. She hands that over. She also agrees to do the residue test, where they basically, like, what am I trying to say? They swab your hands to see if you have gun residue on your hands or if you fired the firearm, essentially. So she's cool, she's calm, she's collected. She has not a care not a worry in the world. She knows she is innocent, and she says, look, do your thing. Let me know what you find. After Anne's testing a few days later, police call her back down to the station to go over everything with her. And they let her know that she not only failed, she failed miserably. She had a lot of incriminating evidence on her cell phone. She failed the polygraph test with flying colors. And Anne's response to this wasn't, what are you trying to say? I'm not guilty. Anne's response was, that's weird.
That's weird.
Now, what was actually found on Anne's cell phone shocked investigators, because it was a conspiracy to commit murder between Anne and her 13-year-old daughter. The two of them planned the death of Anthony and Jacqueline. And the reason that they planned it was because Anthony apparently was abusing Anne, and Jacqueline was ripping their family apart. So both Anne and her daughter had reasons to have issues with both of them. But when they actually called Anne's daughter in to question her, she was visibly distraught. You know, she had a very close relationship with her father, and you could tell that she was very upset, visibly upset about his death. But nevertheless, she was a part in this murder. And if that doesn't shock you, what I'm about to tell you next absolutely will. So in addition to Anne's daughter being involved in it, there was an 18-year-old boy named Gabriel Strauss, who Anne had recruited, groomed, and convinced to be a part of the murder. And when I say be a part, I don't mean, just know about it. I mean, be the one to commit both murders. So Anne had convinced Gabriel, who was a person who kind of had a rough upbringing. He never really had a real home. He kind of raised himself. She convinced this boy, 18 years old, boy, man, however you want to look at it, to commit murder in exchange for stability and for a place to live. So essentially, Anne said, you kill my husband and his mistress, you can come live with us. You'll never have to worry again. This is your home. We'll take care of you. And to Gabriel, who had never experienced stability in a real family life and a real home, this was the ultimate trade-off. He was willing to kill for stability and for comfort. And that's exactly what he did. On Anne's cell phone, what police found was a message from Gabriel, which was the text message that actually incriminated him. And it said, I'm going to slit the girl and bust the dad. And basically he was saying he was going to stab Jacqueline to death and shoot Anthony. And that's exactly what happened. So the night of the murders, Anne goes, she picks up Gabriel, she brings him back to their home, and Gabriel actually lays in wait in the backyard. So he's sitting in the backyard for hours, waiting until Anne gives him the confirmation that everyone in the house is asleep. After that happens, she brings him into the home through the kitchen, and she hands him a gun, the .380, and then he has a knife. So he puts the gun in his pocket, he has the knife in his hand. He goes down to the basement, and he stabs Jacqueline to death. He stabbed her in her chest, her stomach, her legs, her arms, everywhere. After this, he realizes that he can't just, stab her. He has to make sure that she is dead. So he says that he would not leave that basement until he knew she was dead. And that is why she had so many wounds. She had 42 stab wounds on her body, because Gabriel, in his mind, he knew he had to complete this mission in order to have the trade-off that Anne was promising him. So he made sure that Jacqueline was dead. He makes his way upstairs. He goes into Anthony's bedroom where Anthony is asleep. He holds the gun up to Anthony's temple, and he fires and kills Anthony with one gunshot wound to the head. After this, the 13-year-old daughter, whose identity has been concealed as you can probably tell. I don't know her name or any information about her aside from her age. She takes Gabriel back home, and Anne is basically in a rush to stage the crime scene so that it looks like a murder-suicide. She had a great plan, but horrible execution, and someone who is silly enough to think that they can get away with this most likely is going to be silly enough to make silly mistakes along the way. And that's exactly what Anne did. So she plants the gun next to Anthony, the gun that is supposed to look like the weapon that he used to commit suicide. But Anne makes a mistake. She doesn't plant the right gun. She doesn't plant the .380. She plants the .45 caliber. But in her mind, she is convinced that this is the perfect plot. This is the perfect story. It is foolproof. There is no way that she or her daughter or Gabriel will be implicated because they had it set up perfectly, right? But they didn't. But the next day, what do crazy people do, right? They go about their life like normal, like they didn't just wreak havoc. So the family wakes up, and her 13-year-old daughter, the other 4 siblings, they have breakfast, they shower, they leave out of the house like normal. Anne pretends to find her dead husband and call the police. That is why when she made the 911 call, it was so unconvincingly, like, just cold. There was no way that she didn't know what happened based on her tone of voice in the 911 call. But nevertheless, that's what she did. She called the police, and that is where the story basically picks up from. What's crazy about this case is that Anne really used Gabriel as a puppet. And Gabriel has sent letters to TV stations, basically in an attempt to proclaim how bad he feels about what he has done. So he feels extremely guilty for committing the murders, and when they called him in to question him, he spilled immediately. He was like, look, I didn't do this because I wanted to. I did this because I trusted Anne, and I trusted that, you know, if I did it for her, she was going to come through for me and that I would have a place to live. But she's the one who orchestrated all of this. Gabriel told investigators as soon as they asked him. He was grief-stricken. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a savage human being who just wanted to kill. He really felt like he was used as a puppet, and a lot of people feel that way about this case. On different forums that I've seen talking about this case, the general consensus is that Anne was the ultimate perpetrator, even though Gabriel pulled the trigger and committed the killings. All 3 of them were arrested for the deaths of Anthony, Anastasi, and Jacqueline Riggs, and Anne maintained her innocence throughout the entire thing and still maintains her innocence to this day. But after she was arrested, she did make a phone call from the prison that for some strange reason she thought was off the record, but of course was not, in which she doesn't say that she's responsible for the murders, but she basically says, what did they expect? What did Anthony think was going to come of moving his mistress into our home? So she doesn't necessarily, say, oh yeah, I set it up, but she does implicate herself by implying that they had what was coming to them. So when the prosecutors get their hands on this information, they present it to Anne's defense, and Anne's defense essentially begs her to take a plea deal. They're like, look, we're literally, fighting for nothing at this point. You have to take a plea deal. So Anne agrees and takes the deal, and she still got 2 life sentences and is currently serving 60 years minimum in prison. She will not be eligible for any type of parole or possible release until 60 years from her original arrest. So she'll be over 100 years old at that time. The 13-year-old daughter is serving time in a juvenile facility and will be eligible for release after she turns 21 years old. And Gabriel is also serving a double life sentence. He got the same exact sentence that Anne did. Gabriel has been very vocal about what happened, and he has released statements, like I said, to different news outlets, and I will read one of them to you, just a little snippet of it. I thought what I did would make me a hero, when in reality it only made me a monster. So many people were hurt because of my actions. I hope the victim's family can one day forgive me and understand how sorry I am. So he, is very vocal about the fact that he is grief-stricken and guilt-stricken by what he did and what part he played in all of this. It doesn't undo what happened, but when I think of this whole case and this whole story, to me, the biggest monster was Anne, because she knew what she was doing. She didn't want the crime just committed. She could have just done it on her own, right? But she had her 13-year-old innocent daughter involved in killing her own father, and then also brought her boyfriend into it. So it's just a really messed up situation that just, I don't know. I have so many questions about, but this story blew my mind when I read about it. I almost couldn't believe it. I was on Google and I typed in, what did I type in? I think I typed in love triangle murders or something like that, because I did another video about a love triangle that was very interesting. It was very well known, and I wanted to kind of find another video that was along that theme, or make another video along that theme. And this was the first story that popped up. And I'm glad that it did. Obviously not glad that it happened, but I'm glad that I know about this case, because it's horrible. It's very interesting, but it's really horrible what happened in this case, at least for the sake of her 13-year-old daughter and Gabriel. Now, people kind of had mixed feelings about Gabriel because he was old enough to know better. He was an adult. He was 18. But there's also people of the camp who are like, what's the difference between being 17 and 18? Like, you go from being 17, where you don't get necessarily the same sentencing and punishment as an adult, to turning 18 in one day and you're supposed to just magically know the difference. I don't know. I feel like you know right from wrong, no matter what. And Gabriel, at the end of the day, was wrong. But I do still feel like the biggest perpetrator in this case was Anne. And she knew that this could potentially destroy two people's lives, and destroy two other people's lives. And she did it anyway. So that's why I think she is the biggest one to blame. But that is the end of the video. I'm so glad that I made it. When I tell you guys how irritated I was before I started recording this video, I am not lying. I had like 5 different shirts on. Finally, I was like, I'm just putting on a hoodie. They're going to get whatever Shayna I have for them today. But I really just wanted to bring this to you. I am happy. If you made it this far, you know what I'm going to say. You are loyal. You really are. And I appreciate you. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video, which will be posted tomorrow. So make sure you stay tuned. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Have a wonderful week. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, depending on what time it is where you are. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Peace.